Every morning, Ray polished the same patch of wood, the one Sarah once painted with her favorite brush. The ritual began at dawn. A gentle mist hugged the edges of Lakewood's cracked sidewalks, and the maples along Magnolia Street had surrendered most of their leaves to the wind. Inside his modest, white-trimmed cottage, Ray Thompson stirred from sleep with the quiet rustle of the AM radio blending into the scent of brewed decaf. The announcer read yesterday's scores in that steady voice Ray trusted more than any weather app. He sat by the window, newspaper unfolded, wearing the same cardigan Sarah used to insist he throw out. The kitchen counter was tidy, except for one thing. A white envelope, bearing the HOA's emblem like a misplaced official seal, sat unopened under the morning sunbeam. Ray didn't touch it. Not yet. After buttering toast with slow, deliberate movements, he slipped on his worn leather hat, cracked at the brim, still holding the shape of his younger days, and stepped into the crisp October air. The birds fluttered impatiently as he crumbled feed into their dish, muttering half a greeting like old friends accustomed to silence. The fence stood as it always had, straight, solid, and painted a rich shade of red that once shimmered beneath the summer sun. Now, it wore its age like Ray did, without apology. He paused before the third panel, the one Sarah had painted with more care than necessary, her brushstrokes lingering like whispers in the grain. He ran a cloth along it, polishing gently, like buffing a memory. At 7:30 sharp, he reached morning brew. The bell above the door jingled with a familiar warmth, and the waitress behind the counter nodded. "Usual, Mr. Thompson?" He nodded. No words needed. The booth by the window waited like it always did. Tom, with his veteran's cap and twice-patched jacket, shuffled in minutes later. "Did you hear?" Tom began without greeting. "Gloria Bellwood's at it again. Said Pete's birdbath was a hazard to neighborhood aesthetics. Can you believe?" Ray sipped slowly. Lotta energy spent on stone ducks. Tom chuckled, the sound wheezy and amused. Kids running HOA now think we're the weeds in their suburban paradise. They sat in the comfort of shared irritation until the waitress came by with the second pour, no charge, as always. Tom pulled out a dog-eared crossword. Ray watched the steam rise from his mug. Back home, the envelope waited. He opened it with the blunt end of a butter knife, careful not to tear the paper. The letter inside was precise, almost cheerful in its wording. Dear Mr. Thompson, it has come to the board's attention that the exterior perimeter of your property does not meet the approved neighborhood color standards. Specifically, the fence color, red, is not within the designated palette. Please repaint your fence in compliance by November 5th to avoid further action. Ray didn't finish reading. He stared out the kitchen window at the fence. It hadn't changed. Not in color, not in strength, not in meaning. That afternoon, he stood before it once more. The sun had moved past its peak, casting long shadows over the grass. Mrs. Green waved from across the street, carrying her usual loaf of sweet corn bread, but Ray only raised a hand. His gaze never left the wood. He ran his fingers along the rail. The texture hadn't faded, but time had crept into the corners. Sarah had insisted on the barn red, said it reminded her of her grandfather's farm. She was right, of course. She always had been. Inside the garage, he pulled down the small metal step stool and reached into the shelf above the workbench. A faded tin box, labeled in Sarah's handwriting, barn red, for touch UPS. He blew off the dust. His hands trembled slightly as he carried it to the porch. But as he opened the lid, the paint had dried, like the patience he once had. The knock came at 7:10 a.m., sharp, like everything Gloria did. Ray had just sat down at the table, steam rising from his Earl Grey. The rain that began around 5 still lingered, misting the kitchen window in fine droplets. Outside, the gutters along Magnolia Street gurgled gently as fallen leaves swirled into puddles and drifted down toward the storm drain. The quiet Tuesday morning had promised peace, until that knock. He opened the door slowly. Gloria Bellwood stood on the porch, umbrella tucked under one arm like a baton of office. Her navy blazer was pressed to perfection, her HOA badge affixed just above the lapel with bureaucratic pride. The clipboard in her hand, slightly damp at the edges, was already open to a pre-filled form. "Mr. Thompson," she began with clipped civility. "I'm here regarding the non-compliance notice sent last week." Ray adjusted his glasses. "Morning, Gloria. Would you like to step inside out of the rain?" She ignored the invitation. "The fence, Mr. Thompson. Still red. Which, as you know, is not part of the Lakewood-approved exterior palette." He nodded once, calm. "It's Sarah's barn red." "That may be," Gloria replied, flipping a page. "But according to Article 14, Section B of the Community Aesthetic Standards." Ray didn't flinch. "Same color it's been for 25 years. Never heard a complaint until now." "Well," she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "the board's been reviewing older properties for consistency. You've had your notice. This is the formal visit. There's a $300 fine due by the 15th. From behind him, footsteps approached. Eli Turner, barely 23 and still carrying the sleep of a student on break, appeared in the hallway, hoodie half-zipped, hair tousled. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes flicking from his grandfather to the visitor. "This is Ms. Bellwood from the HOA," Ray said, his voice steady. "She's concerned about the color of the fence." Eli glanced at the clipboard. "Seriously?" Gloria turned toward him. "We uphold the standards that keep Lakewood beautiful and orderly, young man." Ray placed a hand gently on Eli's shoulder. "No need for a fuss. Gloria's just doing her duty." Eli bit back a retort. Gloria, apparently satisfied with her delivery, tucked the clipboard under her arm and straightened her umbrella. "I do hope this can be resolved without further action, Mr. Thompson. You'll find the payment information on the back." And with that, she stepped off the porch, heels clicking down the wet walkway, the rain parting around her like she commanded the clouds. Ray closed the door with a soft thud and stood for a moment, staring at the envelope she'd left in his mailbox, bright white, waterproofed, and somehow accusatory. In the back garden, under the awning, a small table waited. Ray poured hot water into a second cup, dropped in another bag of Earl Grey, and motioned Eli to join him. The drizzle made soft music on the tin roof. "You know," Ray said, watching the steam rise, "Sarah used to say rules only work when they remember people, not just paint." Eli stirred his tea, uncertain. "Was she the one who picked that color?" Ray smiled faintly. "Of course. Her grandfather's barn had the same shade. She said it made the house feel brave." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Eli reached for one of the round, salt-dusted crackers from the tin labeled Sarah's Kitchen. "She must have been something." "She was," Ray said, eyes distant. "The fence was her project. Said it gave the yard a spine." "Seems like Ms. Bellwood doesn't care much about spines." Ray chuckled softly. "Gloria's got her own. Made of bylaws and bullet points." The rain picked up, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Eli broke the quiet. "You ever thought of just painting it over? Pick a color from their list and be done with it?" Ray didn't answer immediately. He ran his finger along the rim of his mug, thoughtful. "I suppose I could. Wouldn't be the first time I bent for the sake of quiet. But it wouldn't be Sarah's fence anymore." They sat a while longer as the wind brushed the last stubborn leaves from the trees. The morning had grown colder, but Ray didn't notice. Eventually, Eli spoke again, quieter this time. "She said the board's unanimous, Ray," Eli whispered. "That includes her husband." Eli wasn't snooping, he was helping look for the deed, or so he told himself. Ray had asked him to check the old file cabinet for the deed to the house, but Eli's curiosity took the reins somewhere between the manila folders and the brittle-edge photo envelopes. The living room was a time capsule. Books with yellowed pages lined the shelves, and a faded map of Lakewood stretched across the far wall, marked with thin red lines and tiny circles. "Every day," Ray had once said, "is where Sarah left a piece of her." Afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains. Outside, a soft breeze teased the edge of fall, swaying the wind chime near the porch. Inside, Eli crouched by the coffee table, lifting pages from a cracked ledger with the same caution one might use with a sleeping dog. It wasn't that he didn't trust the HOA, actually, no, that was exactly it. Ray had brushed off the idea of fighting the fine, of filing complaints or raising his voice. "It's just paint," he'd said, sipping his tea like nothing more than a gust had blown through. But Eli had seen the way his grandfather's hand lingered on the fence plank, the weight behind that silence. A small green folder peeked from beneath a dusty binder labeled Gutter Estimates, 2007. He opened it. Inside was a stack of letters, most bearing the same printed header, Lakewood Property Standards Committee. Warnings, assessments, subtle reprimands phrased as neighborly concern. A few were about the lawn. One flagged an unauthorized porch light. But what caught Eli's eye was a spreadsheet tucked in the back, a fee summary. He pulled the paper into the light. HOA dues had doubled in the past 2 years, with new, community maintenance fees added in June, August, and again in October. No meeting notes. No resident votes. He stood, blinking. "Ray," he called toward the kitchen. "You remember paying anything for fence evaluation initiative last spring?" Ray's voice came slow, distant. "Might have. They send so many notices, hard to keep track." Eli folded the sheet and slid it into his pocket. "I'll be at morning brew." The bell over the coffee shop door jingled softly. Inside, familiar faces filled familiar booths. The place smelled of cinnamon rolls and drip coffee, comforting, undemanding. Tom sat near the back with a crossword and a bowl of chili. "Afternoon, kid," he said as Eli slid into the opposite seat. "You're not that much older than me," Eli joked, though both knew it wasn't true. Tom smiled. "You here for the biscuits or the gossip?" Eli held up the spreadsheet. "Bit of both. You remember the HOA raising fees 3 times this year?" Tom's eyebrows lifted. "Once or twice, maybe. But 3? He scratched his chin. "Come to think of it, we never had a town meeting after spring." "That's what I thought," Eli said. "No notices. Just invoices." Tom leaned in. "Gloria runs that board like a private club. You don't get in unless she wants you there." "And her husband?" "Finance chair." Eli sat back, silent for a moment. The waitress brought him a root beer, no questions asked. He and Ray used to split a bottle after Sunday lunch back when Eli still had braces. He twisted the cap, the hiss sharp in the quiet booth. Tom tapped the spreadsheet. "You watch yourself. People who ask questions around here usually get fined for something the next day. I just want to understand where the money's going." Tom stirred his coffee. "Then look where it always goes, contracts." That night, back home, Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, sifting through more papers by the soft light of a lamp shaped like a ship's wheel, a piece from Ray and Sarah's anniversary trip to Bar Harbor. He flipped through maintenance contracts, vendor lists, and then, there it was. Lakewood Fence Renewal Program, vendor, Bellwood Holdings, LLC. He read the line twice. At the bottom, a faint stamp, approved, Chairperson Gloria Bellwood. The air seemed to thin. In the quiet, he could hear Ray's chair creak in the other room as the old man settled in with a book. Eli stared at the document. It wasn't just about the fence anymore. It was about all of it. "Ray," he said slowly, "I think your fence isn't the only thing they're painting over. They didn't need a war, they just needed a spotlight." The clouds hovered low over Lakewood that Thursday, a steady ceiling of gray hanging above the narrow sidewalks and whispering through brittle branches. The wind was soft, but constant, rustling the papers Eli held under his arm as he and Ray stepped into the old public library. Inside, it smelled of cedar shelves and years of careful dusting. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, and only 2 patrons sat scattered among the reading tables. Behind the main desk stood Mrs. Rita Holloway, upright as ever in her cardigan and silver hair bun. She looked up, and her eyes warmed behind thick spectacles. "Well now," she said. Haven't seen you here since Sarah's poetry night, Ray. Ray offered a soft smile. Still haven't recovered from that rhyme about my snoring. Rita laughed and motioned them in. What brings you to? Eli stepped forward. HOA records, ma'am. Public disclosures. Especially vendor contracts, maintenance, annual budgets. I think the last 5 years should be enough. Rita blinked, then nodded, her expression shifting from nostalgic to sharp. Follow me. She led them past rows of faded encyclopedias and local history books to a cabinet marked Civic Records. With a key from her necklace, she unlocked the second drawer. We archive board documents here. Most folks don't know they can look. Ray adjusted the strap of the embroidered canvas bag he carried, Sarah's old sewing handiwork. He didn't say much, just watched Eli spread folders across the nearest table. The paper was dry, brittle in some places. Eli worked methodically, sorting by year, highlighting signatures, noting vendor names. Bellwood Holdings appeared again. And again. 70%, Eli muttered. They've landed 70% of all landscaping, painting, and fence restoration jobs for the HOA. Ray raised an eyebrow but remained quiet. He opened the bag, took out 2 blueberry muffins, one for himself, one for Rita, and placed them gently on a napkin at her desk. Rita smiled. Still my favorite, she said. In the far corner, Eli tapped his phone and snapped a quick photo of a 3-page contract from 18 months ago. This one's been edited. Look here, the digital signature's timestamp is 2 days after the board supposedly approved it. Ray leaned in, eyes narrowing. Eli added the page to a separate pile, his own file, sorted and clipped, initials in the top corner. A quiet kind of armor. They spent the better part of 2 hours combing through invoices and archived emails printed on fading ink. Half the documents bore names of companies tied to the same address. A P.O. box shared by Bellwood Holdings, a faux Lakewood Beautification Committee, and something called Civic Unity Incorporated. Rita reappeared with a thin folder. You boys might want to see this. Proposal from a few years back, I submitted it myself. Suggested a playground extension near Willow Park, for seniors to use during physical therapy. Eli scanned the pages. Rejected without vote. Rita nodded. Said it didn't align with HOA branding goals. Outside, the sky had darkened slightly, clouds threatening rain but holding back. Eli closed a folder, placed it neatly in the cloth bag. If this much is public, I wonder what they're hiding in private meetings. Ray said nothing, just rubbed his thumb over the edge of Sarah's stitching, little vines trailing the top seam. Then Eli stilled. Ray, he whispered. He held up one page, a signed fence contract. But the signature for Thomas J. Woodson looked wrong. Tom signs with a looped J, Eli said. This one's straight. And the date's off by 2 months. Tom told us he hadn't voted since last winter. Ray leaned closer. That's not just shady, Ray. That's a felony. It came folded, certified, and scented faintly of triumph, the HOA hearing notice. The envelope rested squarely in the center of Ray's doormat, catching the final amber beam of a late autumn sun. Its embossed seal gleamed, and beneath it, a cursive that feigned elegance masked the sharp edges of formality. Ray picked it up without a word. The paper was heavy, heavier than it should have been, as though it carried something more than ink and authority. Inside, his living room hummed with the low crackle of the fireplace. The lamp on the side table threw warm light across the rug Sarah had once chosen from a catalog, pointing at it with a laugh and saying, "Too floral, just right." Ray sat down slowly, his fingers tracing the seal before breaking it. As he read, the shadows on his face shifted. Not from surprise, but from recognition. Gloria's tone, even on paper, was unmistakable. You are hereby requested to appear before the Lakewood Homeowners Association Review Committee for a formal hearing regarding Violation 4C, paint color noncompliance and aesthetic disruption. Continued non-action may result in fines, penalties, or formal community-level sanctions. the signature curled like a snake under her name. Eli entered a moment later, jacket damp with mist and cheeks red from the wind. He peeled off his scarf and took one look at the envelope on the table. "Is that?" Ray nodded. "They've made it official." Eli picked it up, scanned the lines, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. "This reads like a summons. Like they're holding court under your porch lamp." Ray leaned back. "She wants control. Not compliance." Eli dropped onto the armchair across from him, pulling his phone from his coat. "We can fight this. There are procedures. We can go to the county mediation board, file for misrepresentation." "No," Ray said gently. "Not yet." Eli frowned. Ray reached for a leather folder, old, the corners softened by time, and opened it on the coffee table. Inside were pages of HOA bylaws, highlighted in orange and underlined in Sarah's faded handwriting. Eli leaned in, surprised. "She used to read them," Ray murmured. "Said, if they get to write the rules, at least we should know the footnotes." Together, they began flipping pages. Eli took notes. Ray sipped the Earl Grey tea his grandson had poured minutes earlier, the steam rising like small memories. The clauses were vague, inconsistently enforced. One line, marked with Sarah's neat pen, read, "Color restrictions may be waived for historical significance or memorial designation." Eli circled it. "That's our lever." Outside, wind brushed the gutters. Inside, silence fell again until Ray stood and crossed to the bookshelf. From the bottom drawer, beneath a folder marked Utilities, he pulled out a shoebox wrapped in soft linen. He placed it beside the bylaws and opened it slowly. Inside, tied with ribbon, were letters, all in Sarah's hand. Dozens. Some in envelopes, some folded with pressed wildflowers, others bare. Ray reached for one near the top, yellowed at the edge. He didn't open it right away. He simply rested his fingers against the words she'd once written across the front, "For when you're too tired to argue." Then, he unfolded it. Her handwriting was slightly uneven but resolute. "Don't let the quiet steal what matters, Ray." He read it twice. Then a third time, aloud, his voice soft but clear. Eli watched him, eyes dim with something between respect and worry. "So? What now?" Ray reached for the hearing notice and folded it back into its envelope. He didn't look at it again. Instead, he turned to Eli and nodded once. "Let's give them something to remember." 2 weeks later, the fence stood, red as ever, but now with a brass plaque beside it. The morning air was sharp but kind, the sort of chill that nipped at your nose but let the sun make peace with your skin. Ray Thompson stood at the edge of his lawn, one hand in the pocket of his deep blue sweater, the one Sarah had knitted the winter before her final spring. His breath formed quiet clouds that vanished like worries no longer needed. The brass plaque caught the light. Sarah's fence, in memory of kindness, it read, etched cleanly beneath the old red slats she once touched with laughter and paint. Ray smiled, not the kind you wear for other people, but the one that comes when you're alone and know something's right. Eli stepped onto the porch, a worn canvas bag slung over his shoulder. He had a train to catch, books to carry, and a notebook in hand titled Lakewood Bylaws Reform in his neat handwriting. His eyes scanned the quiet neighborhood, less stiff now, less suspicious. "I left copies at the council office," he said. "And 3 folks from the new board want to meet next week." Ray nodded, still gazing at the fence. "You've done more in a month than I managed in 10 years. Eli chuckled. "Takes a stubborn teacher to raise a stubborn student." Down the lane, Mr. and Mrs. Woodson were setting up folding chairs under a maple tree. A thermos of coffee sat on a picnic table while others brought out banana bread and cinnamon rolls. The new Saturday gathering, no longer at morning brew, but right there in backyards and front lawns, had started with a question and grown into a tradition. Mrs. Woodson waved. "Ray! Bring your mug." Ray lifted it slightly in reply. "Be right there." He turned to Eli, resting a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Proud of you, kid." Eli looked down. I was just tired of seeing good people pushed around. They count on that tiredness, Ray said. Not today. As they walked toward the gathering, a small envelope peeked out from the mailbox. Ray pulled it free, no stamp, hand-delivered. The handwriting was careful, unsure. Inside, a single note. Thank you for standing up. We were waiting for someone to speak first. A neighbor. Ray folded it gently and tucked it into his sweater pocket. The porch light flicked on behind them as the sun climbed. He paused by the fence, running a hand over the plaque. The paint, fresh and familiar, seemed to warm beneath his touch. He turned and closed the gate, not to keep people out, but because even open places deserve a frame. And from the porch, the red fence didn't look like defiance anymore. It looked like home. The red fence still stood, not just as a memory of love, but as proof that one quiet voice could echo through an entire town. What began as a citation became a question, and that question became a call, for fairness, for honesty, for neighbors to truly see one another again. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble under their own weight. Maybe it's never too late to knock on a door, share a cup of coffee, and ask, gently but firmly, is this really right? Because sometimes, all it takes to change everything, is one red fence and someone willing to stand by it.